Chapter 8 Blefuscu and Freedom. It wasn't long before I arrived at the royal port of Blefuscu and was given a warm welcome. Two guides climbed up into my hands and led me to the gates of the capital city, where I waited until they announced me. The Emperor and the royal family came out to greet me. His Majesty got down from his horse and the Empress from her coach. No one seemed frightened of me in any way. I lay down on the ground to kiss their hands. "I have come here, your Majesty, with the permission of the Emperor of Lilliput, to meet you and offer you my services." I said nothing of my disgrace back in Lilliput, which I wasn't supposed to know about anyway. I was just thankful to be free of that kingdom after a stay of 9 months and 13 days, and I accepted the warm welcome from the Blefuscudians. There was no building in this kingdom big enough to house me, so I spread my cover on the ground and wrapped myself in it to go to sleep. I spent the first few days exploring the island. On the third day, while walking along the northeast coast, I spotted in the distant sea something that looked like an overturned boat. I took off my shoes and stockings and waded out towards it as the tide pushed it towards me. "It is a boat!" I cried with joy. "A boat my size, not Blefuscudian size. It seems to be a longboat from a sailing ship. Perhaps it was tossed loose by a storm." I immediately headed back to shore and to the Emperor's palace, where I explained to His Majesty what I had seen. And then I begged, "Your Majesty, would you be kind enough to lend me 20 of the tallest ships that were left in your fleet, and 3,000 seamen?" My request was granted, and I hurried to prepare some ropes to take back to the longboat with me. At the same time, the fleet was sailing around that side of the island. Meanwhile, the tide had brought the overturned longboat in closer to shore, but I still had to swim out and push it to shallower water. Once I was able to stand, I had the Blefuscudian seamen toss me the ropes, which I tied to the longboat. With the ships pulling and me pushing, we brought the boat closer to shore. Then, with 2,000 men working with ropes and pulleys, we managed to turn the boat right side up. How delighted I was to discover that it was barely damaged. I spent the next 10 days making paddles, then brought my boat around to the port. The Emperor was at the front of the crowd on shore, gaping at the size of the boat. "Your Majesty," I said, bowing humbly, "it seems that I've been fortunate to have this boat drift my way, for it's exactly what I need to return to my own country. I'm just as fortunate to have such a kind and generous Emperor as yourself to help me bring it here to port. Now, I need one last favor." "Speak, Man Mountain," said the Emperor with a smile. "I will grant you whatever is in my power to give. I'll need provisions for my voyage and, of course, your permission to leave." "You shall have both, my friend." "And what of the message you received 3 days ago from the Emperor of Lilliput?" I asked, knowing that the Lilliputians would become suspicious when I didn't return in several days, and try to get me back. "The envoy did arrive to inform me of your crimes and to demand that I return you, tied hand and foot, to be punished as a traitor. If I didn't, he threatened that it would be considered an act of war." The Emperor of Blefuscu was smiling as he went on. "Please don't worry, for I sent the envoy back just today with the friendliest of words to His Majesty. I also informed him what he already knew, that it would be quite impossible for us to tie you hand and foot and get you to Lilliput if you didn't want to go. I also reminded him that even though you captured our fleet, you were still very helpful in making peace between us." "And did you tell him I plan to leave?" "Yes. I assured him that both our kingdoms would soon have nothing to fear from you and no longer have the burden of feeding and clothing you, for you had found the boat and would be heading back to your own land." "You're very kind, your Majesty, and I do thank you. But hear me out, Man Mountain. I'm prepared to offer you my protection if you would agree to stay here and serve me." While I believed the Emperor to be sincere, my experience in Lilliput had taught me not to trust any ruler ever again. So although I couldn't tell him that, I did explain, "Your Majesty, I do appreciate your trust in me, but I really couldn't be the cause of another war between your two kingdoms, now that you're finally at peace." With my mind made up and the Emperor's help, 500 men were put to work making sails for my boat. Then, 1,000 carpenters helped me make the masts, oars, and cables. For an anchor, I used a large rock I found on the beach. At the end of a month, everything was ready. The boat was loaded with the meat of 100 oxen and 300 sheep, and enough bread and drink for my voyage. I took 6 cows and 2 bulls, and many ewes and rams, with the hope of breeding them back in England, and to feed them on board, I had bags of hay and corn. I went to the palace to bid farewell to the Emperor and the royal family. As His Majesty offered his hand, I lay down on my face to kiss it. He then presented me with a full-length, life-size painting of himself and 50 tiny pouches, each containing 200 sprugs, their gold coins. I would have been delighted to take some little people with me, but this was not permitted, even if any of them had wanted to go. Still, His Majesty felt it was necessary to have my pockets searched just the same. So it was that on September 24th, 1701, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I set sail. My pocket compass served me well as I headed north the entire day. By evening, I neared an island that appeared to be uninhabited. Feeling safe, I dropped anchor near the shore and slept very well. The following morning, I continued heading north, then veered to the northeast. At 3 in the afternoon of the following day, I spotted a sail heading southeast. With the help of the wind, I quickly followed until the ship sighted me, and I joyously recognized its British flag. At 6 that evening, I gathered my belongings and my tiny animals from the longboat and climbed aboard the ship, a British merchant vessel returning from Japan. When I told the story of my adventures to the captain, he thought I was mad and told his officers, "Whatever dangers this man has faced have caused him to lose his mind." "I haven't lost my mind, sir," I argued. "Look, here's proof." And I took the tiny cattle and sheep out of my pocket and placed them on the table before me. "Good Lord!" cried the astonished captain. "You are telling the truth." As further proof, I showed him the tiny bags of gold the Emperor had given me, and his full-length picture. Our trip back to England was very pleasant. The captain was eager to help me care for my tiny cattle and even gave me some of his best biscuits, which I crushed into a powder and mixed with water to feed them. To show my thanks when he docked in England, I gave him a cow and a pregnant sheep. My feet touched British soil on April 13th, 1702, just under 3 years from the time I had left. I stayed with my family for 2 months and made a large amount of money displaying my cattle, then much more by finally selling them. I bought a fine house for my family and gave them enough money to live on for several years. As always, I was too restless to stay on land for long, so I signed on board a merchant ship, heading for the coast of India.